Welcome everybody. I should begin by acknowledging that we meet on the lands of Gala people. Okay. And we respect their spiritual connection with the land. Okay, agenda item 1 is the confirmation of the minutes. We've got 2 sets of minutes to be confirmed. Would someone like to move that we confirm them? Someone? Thanks. Councillor Pitch. All those in favour? Second set of minutes. Someone like to move?
Oh, and
that covers both of them.
Yeah.
2 meetings were indistinguishable. All right, thank you. Okay, no adjourned business. There's no particular report from the chair, presentations or deputations. So our next item is the Internal Audit Report. Before we do that, can I just suggest to the members of the committee a slight reordering of the agenda? I had the benefit of a discussion with the management this morning, and we thought that it might be more logical if we put the updated long-term financial planning principles ahead of the quarterly financial report. So in other words, item 7.4 leapfrogs item 7.2.
Great.
Yeah, everyone happy with that? You can see where it's headed. Is that obviously we keep getting reports of deficits after deficits after deficits, and there's going to be a long-term financial plan. You know, it'd be good for us to be cognizant of those principles before we get into the the last 3 months. Yeah. So if that's acceptable, then I propose to do that. Okay, back to the agenda. Item 7.1 is the internal report. We have some visitors here. Would you care to introduce yourselves?
Yes, hello, Heather Martins, Director from KPMG. I lead our risk consulting practice for our council clients for South Australia and the Northern Territory, and work alongside Eric Berry, who is the partner for the Internal Audit program for City of Akapringa as well. And I have with me Nadia Governor.
Hi, good afternoon, council members. Navi Ganawardana. I work under Heather and with Eric. I was also the manager on this particular review that's being tabled today.
And we have our subject matter expert, Glenn Winkler, who is dialed in as well. Good day, Glenn.
Hi, everyone. Glenn Winkler, partner in KPMG and at the Adelaide office.
Welcome. Splendid accent. Now, how do we want to handle this? Do you want to say anything before we?
Yeah, sure. We'll do a short presentation. We'll keep it short and sharp for yourselves, and I'm happy to open up for questions. I think just by way of context, noting in South Australia, we've done a number of business continuity BCP reviews for a number of councils. Post-COVID, we've seen a really strong need to understand what are our business continuity plans and processes, noting that we've also had an uptick in terms of emergency management, extreme weather events, flooding, fires, etc., and also cybersecurity. So with that as a backdrop, ensuring that continuity of critical business operations is absolutely critical, especially in the council context. For the scope of this review, we looked at the City of Akapringa's business continuity plan, emergency management plan. We looked at the business impact assessments, risk reviews, and the overarching clarity of the roles, responsibilities, the accountabilities, and also the reporting and governance that sits over the top of that as well, which is absolutely critical in terms of ensuring the right governance. But with that being said, I'll hand over to Glenn. We'll talk over at a high level in terms of the key findings. Thanks, Glenn. Over to you.
No worries. Thank you. Yeah, very, very solid position in relation to the City for Wrangaparinga. Members would have read the report. There's a number of positive observations that we made in terms of preparedness for continuity and emergency management scenarios. And it is important to note that there are varying levels of maturity across local government entities, both locally and nationally. And it's pretty much fair to say, we believe City of Wrangaparinga is in a fairly good position in terms of understanding where they sit and being able to respond to some fairly serious emergency incidents. There's a lot of good maturity that was shown to us. The approach to crisis management is well structured, clear leadership capabilities put into place in terms of response to an event. Formalised assessment for testing scenarios and emergencies is also in place. Strategic risk reports that incorporate BCP related risks that consider current market events and trends, which is important because the environment of BCP does fluctuate over periods of time. So there might be specific risks that are quite unique to the council district, to the community itself, but there are also things that are evolving outside of the community, such as potentially cyber and telecommunications type events, and we've noted Optus. And so these need to be considered in terms of refreshment of the plans and understanding of the potential impact. Maturity in terms of communications and response procedures that look at targeting both external and internal stakeholders, including media, are certainly there and have been recently tested and assessed. We're very comfortable with what was presented to us. Therefore, in relation to the internal audit findings, you'll find we have 3 moderate findings and 3 POIs, opportunities for improvement for the council. So just quickly working through the moderate findings. Finding 1, which is around updating CMAP and misaligned critical function MAOs. There is obviously a need to ensure that CMAP is reflective of the current environment and the independencies between the CMAP and other planning aspects are strong. At the moment, there is 72 hours that's being designated as the maximum allowable outage for most critical functions. However, we had some indication from parts of the businesses and an example of both waste management and communication functions that was slightly too long, and there'd be a preference to reduce that in the future. So in relation to the recommendations, our view was to definitely review the business critical functions with stakeholders to reassess the maximum allowable outages for the critical functions to ensure that they're reflective and accepted by stakeholders and a consistent understanding in terms of those. And then schedule periodic reviews, in this case annually, to assess any changes in the operating environment, take into consideration trends that are happening within the environment itself. Audit finding 2, which was business continuity subplans are incomplete and have not been developed for all critical business functions. So understanding that there were 2 from 6 business critical functions which had CAPs prepared. So some of those are slightly incomplete in terms of some sections, so level of detail certainly needs to be included, in particular around some recovery strategies, better articulation of what that looks like. And the BCAPs for non-critical functions need to be developed and also referenced up the line through the CFATs as well. So our recommendation is to do holistic review around both the CAPs and the BCAPs to ensure alignment. Alignment is critical because they do need to form a consistent approach. Implement some period of structured reviews and ensure some completeness. And what we're saying by that in terms of completeness is having a level of quality around the completion of those reports. So that's in place so that updated and new documents are at a level which is both consistent but have enough determination around the quality and the detail so that they can be enacted. And we believe, certainly implementation of standard templates is a good approach for this. And then finally, finding 3, which is formal testing of the CMA plan, hasn't been done recently, hasn't been done in terms of since November 21, we understand, through the storm of Warringah, which was a significant activity that we had looked at and included as part of the audit. And the verification of some of the elements of CMAP hasn't been undertaken. So things like the maximum allowable outages, again, making sure that they're consistent with the requirements. So the recommendations around that is ensuring that there is annual testing that's executed, and that includes systems recovery testing and recovery time verification with the ICT team. We do also note at this point that the agreed management actions do say that formal testing had been scheduled in November, so we would obviously seek to get some input from the management team in terms of how that testing went and what potentially further changes could be injected in the action plans. So they're the 3 moderate findings, and then we have really the PIOs, which is around reviewing of the BCF, the business continuity framework documentation, just to ensure that there's some consistency around that, and all the sub-plans aligned with that are continuous and work up through that particular plan. Look at regular training and awareness for staff that have responsibilities of critical functions and are team members in some of those plans that will be drawn out when incidents occur, and then improve the tracking of outcomes from both post-incident reviews, and that includes improved reporting to the CMT, to the critical management team. So they're really the summary of the 3 PIOs, the 3 medium findings. We certainly believe it's in a very, very good position, and Council has quite a mature framework in place. So thanks, Heather.
We just suggest that we invite a management response and then have the discussion.
Through the chair, we're quite pleased with the findings of this internal audit. There's nothing in there that has taken us by surprise, and the recommended management actions will be certainly be achievable. We did have the emergency management exercise earlier in November, which was Scorcher Warringah. So we simulated an exercise of a bushfire, not only in our area, but in surrounding areas. That was a full day exercise that went extremely well. So we're happy with where we are, of course, acknowledging that there's improvements to be made.
Thank you. Anything? No? Okay, discussion? Andrew?
No, I think as been said, looking at the report, it's good to see there's a few issues that were observed. So that's cool. Just some basic things up today.
I pretty much agree with everything Andrew just said. That would be my only concern, that we were sort of seeing some historical gaps, but it seems that it's coming into an alignment and really more about making sure the systems and processes are there so we're not deviating again. That's all. But yeah, all good.
If from my point of view, I'd be saying that the testing is really, really important. So it's good you did that one, but And the recommendation is to keep that as an annual thing. So these things don't get planned overnight either. So there's probably a bit of a resourcing challenge perhaps, but really, really important. So, yeah.
Maybe to wrap this up, we've just got 2 or 3 questions. First, I hope the first one is not improper, but I'll rely on you to tell me if it is. How do we rank compared to the other clients?
Glenn can comment on that, but we've done a fair few reviews, and I'd say within a South Australia context, Prudential is probably at the highest maturity that we've seen within a SA council. Would you concur, Glenn?
Yes, I'd hate to put you in the top 10%, but that's pretty much where I see it. Absolutely.
Okay. The second one, about business continuity, when we do these exercises, at some stage or other, do we do an IT-based exercise?
Through the chair, there has been a commencement of some critical business testings in the IT area, and we also have an internal audit on the IT disaster recovery coming up at the beginning of next year.
Okay, and how's that disaster specified? Because as we learn more about the potential, we're discovering just how bad IT disasters can be progressively. So I'm wondering who actually writes a scenario.
I'll need to take that on notice. I'll need to have a discussion with the IT manager and come back to you.
Okay. My final question is, how engaged is council in this, and how do we engage council in this? Because obviously it's important council itself satisfied. Now, does it do that directly, or does it rely on us?
Through the chair, so in the example of the recent emergency management exercise that we had, we advised elected members that we were having it. I gave them a bit of an overview of how the day would play out, and I've also been provided a report that I need to review from our senior emergency management officer, which we will present to elected members. And obviously we have the regular reporting through the ARC committee to elected members regarding our business continuity arrangements and risk management processes.
Okay, so just for my application, when it goes to council together with that, do you say, oh, and by the way, it's been to the ARC committee and they were happy with it?
Through the chair, certainly we can do that.
Okay, all right. Very good, thank you. So we've got these 2 recommendations in front of us. And the first one invites us to add a comment. Is there any comment that anyone would care to add? I would have thought it's just something like is generally satisfied with the findings and the adequacy of the management's response. Wouldn't that be? Isn't that captured?
If generally satisfied
with the report and with the adequacy of the management's response. Well, first of all, any discussion on that? If not, I'll ask someone to move it. Yeah.
I'm happy to move. Second.
Thanks, Councillor Pritchard, seconded. Well, thank you very much. Thanks, Helen, and thank you and your team. Appreciate it. Appreciate the hard work. Yeah, cheers.
Thank you.
All right. Oh, sorry, we need to vote. Yes, I always forget that. All those in favour? Thank you. All right. So now, as per the preliminary discussion, we move to agenda item 7.4, the long-term financial planning principles. Jake, did you want to say anything?
I'll take the report as read. Through the chair, there will be an update about a proposed EM workshop with the Audit and Risk Committee members and the elected members, and hence the second recommendation that has been added today. But happy to take the report as read and answer any questions.
Thank you. I'll just throw it open. Now, what's this rule? You're not asked questions, but you're not allowed to debate issues, is that it?
Until you get a mover and a second.
Oh, okay,
So
yeah.
you can.
Yeah.
But you just need a mover and a second, then you get into the debate.
Okay.
Questions anytime.
So if I get a move around the second or right now, does that mean we can do questions and debate?
Yes.
Great. That makes it a lot easier. So, thank you, Paul. A seconder? No. All right, now let's go. Questions or comments?
I have just one kind of comment, observation or question perhaps. Coming fresh from the City of Mitcham's discussion of the same issues last night, I was struck by there was a presentation and there was a discussion around what financial sustainability actually meant. And we talk about it all the time, but to tease it out gave rise to a significantly helpful and robust conversation, which helped frame what we were actually, why we were looking at it and what was the purpose. So it was very much a preliminary discussion. And I found myself attracted to that approach because I don't know that all the people in the room actually, first of all, know what it means or agree what it means. And so I wonder whether that could be something that we could just, potentially telling people how to suck eggs, but just I wouldn't mind what your perspective is on that and whether that sort of reality tests through the members.
Through the chair, I guess in front of us today, we've got the proposed or draft long-term financial plan principles, which we go into the chamber later this month. They will set the framework, I guess, for this first 24-25 budget and the outward years beyond that. As far as capturing the essence of financial sustainability and what that means, the long-term financial plan itself has the key principles, which in this case we're proposing 5. That might change. It also has, the dollars and cents in Excel format at the back. There's also a number of pages that sort of flesh out the long-term financial plan principles and what they mean. And there would be an opportunity from within that text, I think, to just expand a little bit more on what financial sustainability means and make that a bit clearer if that sounds reasonable.
Or even if I can suggest rather than expand, contract, there was I could get the slide and I can get it sent to you. There was a slide put up last night which basically said financial sustainability, we think this means this in the context of that, but not that, or and it was like so simple as a starting premise. Everything you're talking about is great, but I'm not sure that everyone's reading all that and fully understood all that. And it was about, equity and intergenerational and not having service disruption, but also not having unintended. It was very simple. I really liked it. I'm more than happy to extract it from the presentation and share it. I thought it was a great starting point. Now we could craft something similar, just as a foundation principle at the beginning, which sets the tone for the rest. I don't know. I just found it really. Everyone was talking, and we were all talking around the same things, and it felt like it was a helpful tool.
I think a chief executive.
Yeah. Thank you, Paul. And any slides that we can share and learn off others, I'm more than happy to have a look at those. Jay will correct me if I'm wrong, but as a sector as a whole, there's already some financial benchmarks around financial sustainability, which is really useful. And that forms part of our thinking, particularly around debts and ratios and surpluses, etc. And that's one of the key metrics, I think, that we've leaned on in terms of, how do we measure financial sustainability, align with the sector's benchmarks around that space. But certainly if there's things that another council's done that you think has been useful, Paul, we'd really welcome having a look at that and seeing how we might incorporate it it's certainly been a very, I think, good conversation with our elected members. We've had quite a number of sessions with them. And it's a continuing, I guess, educational piece to make sure that the elected members are also up to speed around that. But I like the idea of that sector-wide benchmarking because it actually gives us an objective measure of how we stack up across the sector.
And just to be clear, this is not inconsistent with that. This was just that sound, that one kind of capturing it in the essence of it.
Yeah.
So how would we capture this in an action, given it's due to be considered on the 12th of December?
Through you, Chair, I think the principles that we're going, or the council will be considering next week, is really setting that principle. So at some stage through the next budget cycle, we'll be using those principles in forming up the budget and the actual long-term financial plan itself, which I expect will come back sort of middle of next year for formal endorsement. So I think there's still opportunities there for a discussion as we land the long-term financial plan. I'm just going to look at David and Jade and make sure that's correct.
Through the chair, and if I may add, we had an elected member session just this Tuesday night, and certainly happy for any feedback from Councillor Pritchard and Councillor Yeomans on that. But I think there was some robust discussion about, the principles are setting a framework, but what will be really instrumental with the long-term financial plan will be the assumptions that underlie all the financial modelling, and it's the financial modelling that's showing the forecast of our operating position, our debt, and our other key financial indicators that is really, the heart of the long-term financial plan. So I think it'll be covered through that. We can certainly provide a verbal update to council ahead of the item on Tuesday night to say that we've had this discussion at the Audit and Risk Committee. But I think this is really only the start of the conversation, and as we go through the modelling and I guess the discussion around, are there trade-offs or how are we managing the operating position or the borrowings or any of those other key metrics going forward, that will really determine what financial sustainability is looking like for our council.
Okay, so what we're being asked to do is to note this. I suspect there might be one or two other additions that we want to make, of which Ian's point is the first of those additions. Yeah. So I think it's important we keep a record of this for the minutes as we add. Yeah. So maybe you'd be good enough to give us a form of words. So it says that they're being presented to council in December for adoption and adds A, B, C, because I've got one that I'm going to try it on you, but I know Andrew wants to talk. So, but I'm very keen for us to, where points are made, which are supported around the room, that we capture them, that they don't just sort of disappear and they keep coming back. That we build up a progressive agenda. Sorry? Yeah, I know. And this is the problem we've talked about before. I'm being reminded that we do have an action list, and it's easier to just add an item to the action list. That's true. But what this means is that the minutes themselves get robbed of substance, and that, they become anodyne, which I think is good.
Yeah, I agree. And in terms of the wording, this is meant to be the outcome of the meeting, so the action should be consistent with the minutes. In terms of the wording, I would just there's nothing wrong with what we've just discussed. It was more just I remember this moment last night thinking, it was really helpful, and I just wanted to share that. So I suppose the wording might be that the committee, if the committee so agrees, encourages something like the sharing of information in relation to I'm sorry, it's probably my head. He sends me this thing, I'll think of it, but that could be an action. I'd be more than happy to find this and share it with the committee out of session in the next few days. I'm sure he'll give it to me. It wasn't a confidential meeting. But I think it's about the actual policy, etc., around the accessibility of some aspects of it that are not necessarily well understood with all members of administration or council, but just to make it more accessible, to have recourse to some helpful materials in public domain in other councils. I'm really struggling to find the words, but I know exactly. I just want to be able to share this with you and say, put that at the front end because I think it'll make it really accessible. I'm happy to do that at a session. It doesn't need to be there.
We can try this out on your board. What if we say, adds and draws council's attention to the information that exists on benchmarking generally for financial sustainability in local government? Something you think?
Well, I think they're doing that anyway, and this was more of a simpler.
It's a message from us. Yeah. I'll run it up.
The issue that we've got here is we've got that lots rain moved in secondary, so now we're trying to add to us.
Yeah, I understand that'll need to be the subject of a separate resolution, right?
We can do that,
Yeah. Councillor.
Yeah, I was just going to say that's probably where Councillor Pritchard and I can step in a bit too, because at the council meetings, whenever there's minutes or something come up in an agenda item, it's got reference to the ARC. Either one of us will be able to, or we actually fill in, we say, look, it's kind of the ARC. These are some of the points that were raised. I'll give you an example. There was last meeting, we talked about the extended long service leave and that sort of financial liability that was there. So didn't rave on about it, just made the point that this was something that the ARC considered. And I think it just provides reassurance to the elected members that there is that discussion happening. And we just sort of bring some of those points to the meeting. So as far as next week go, because there is a short time frame there, I've just made a note of it here. That was just something that I would probably bring up as part of a debate, as opposed to a question. But just say these were sort of the discussions in relation to that agenda item that were brought up by the ARC.
Yeah, I take your point. So the minutes are something that should be of assistance to you in raising those things in the meeting, rather than just ending with having noted it. That's, I guess, my point. Is that, have I interpreted you correctly? Okay. Well, we'll come back to that. Andrew,
From my view, I looked at and thought points that they were looking at as the principles look fairly sound. The council's challenge is going to be what sits under that. So they've obviously told them back in the surplus, so they've got that there. Consider what your debt position is, that's part of it. Some interesting issues is back into the surplus and reducing elements of rates. So it seems to be silent on asset management, service level efficiency gains. So that comes under the total structure to get the budget and long-term financial plan back into shape. Some of those, I suppose, key things that will be surely flushed out in due time.
Well, maybe I could, in association with that, can raise my issue right now. This ability of local councils in the state to borrow, the economists call it a moral hazard. And I think it is. We've got 7 straight years of deficit here, and we're not proposing to put any ceiling on the debt as part of our principles. If you had to go to the NAB or something to borrow this money, it wouldn't just be a matter of getting a little resolution from a council. Now, the difference is that we expropriate money from people, so we don't have to sell something in order to make the money. But that is what justifies, I suppose, the borrowing facilities. But what the danger is that it removes some of the disciplines that would be applied to anybody else. I mean, for me, my money, the form of reads under 2 is not tough enough. I mean, for instance, if interest rates fall, you can borrow more. If you read principle 2. I don't think we want to be having a party if interest rates fell.
Yeah. Through you, Chair, maybe I can just add some colour and light to the discussions that we have had as elected members. Certainly, I think borrowings in and of itself isn't necessarily a bad thing. It's whether those borrowings are sustainable in the medium to long term. Having borrowings increasing in an environment where we're running deficits isn't sustainable. So the first order of priority, certainly from administration, is to work with elected members in this council term, and that's the first principle, to get back to a balanced budget to be able to service, and including that, the servicing of the interest costs. Beyond that, then the principle around borrowings, we've tried to emphasise, is really about not borrowings for things that don't generate a return, but being open to borrowings where there might be a return generated and a reasonable payback period to do that. So that's the principles that's covered in point 1, and then point 2 talking around the borrowings being linked back to returns and a reasonable payback period to become a little bit more disciplined about that. So certainly your comment, Chair, around continuing to borrow and running deficits over a 7-year period isn't sustainable. And I think that's acknowledged in that first principle and a desire to get back in the term of this council. So not 5 years from now, not 10 years from now, in the term of this council, and certainly in my view, as early as possible in the term of this council.
So just on that, then just from my point of view, because there's 2 options in principle 2.
Yep.
So if the ARC's got a feeling towards having a debt seal, a figure, that's obviously leading towards the first option as opposed to the second option, because the first one does say, sorry, number 2 does, the first option of number 2 does say council adopts a dollar value debt ceiling, which is obviously nominating, you need to nominate a figure. So with the ARC, is the ARC more comfortable with that situation where there is a dollar value nominated, which is basically putting a ceiling on the debt, as opposed to the second option, which is not having that debt ceiling? I mean, I'm quite happy having a dollar figure. I think there should probably be something there because it does actually show that sort of discipline. But there is that flexibility within that one that, as the CEO just alluded to, if there was going to be a financial benefit by extending that for those reasons, you've got that flexibility there. But in the interim, there is actually a dollar figure there that might prevent some continually wanting to spend and not having that sort of return.
Thanks, Councillor. Just to assist the reading discussion, let's just call them 2A and 2B. Okay, because what's before us is whether we have a preference, and Councillor Yeoman's expressed a preference for 2A. Yeah.
Through the Chair, just to be, I guess, to clear maybe some misunderstanding, both 2A and 2B are proposing a debt ceiling. Under 2A, once we've gone through the process of coming up with our new long-term financial plan by June 2024, so within 6 months, at that point, we'll know if we want to deliver a capital work plan, the debt ceiling will be this, and there'll be levers to pull. But once we get to the end of that process, we will have a debt ceiling. And under 2, debt beyond the currently approved limit, that's the current approved limit is $138.5 million. So there is a debt ceiling there as well. So under both scenarios, there will be a debt ceiling. However, there is the caveat around additional debt beyond this can be accessed, but there must be a reason, an NPV, a business case, a payback period that is of benefit to the council for us to access debt above that ceiling.
Yeah, I get that, but I think the wording is a bit well, for me anyway, the wording is a little unclear, is because I'm not sure if it was a capital investment that of itself generates a return, I get that. That's easy, yeah? So by all means borrow for that, but probably at no longer period than the inverse of whatever the interest rate is at that time. Yeah? However, if you look at literally at the form of words here, you know, the return could be increased rates. That could be the return. And that would comply with the principle as it's written there, as I read it, because there's no specification that the increased expenditure needs to be for capital purposes.
Through you, Chair. Certainly the intent in crafting those principles was to, and particularly around the return, was very distinct in to say that any borrowings for, let's say, commercial or investment return purposes was distinctly around the returns on that investment, not allowing for the typical revenues around rates, etc. So, for example, the council's now resolved to retain the water assets. If it required some investment in potentially broadening the ability to capture water, and that required a capital investment, the business case would be centred solely around what sort of return that isolated investment proposal would generate. So the council consider potentially might want to borrow for that sort of situation, and not allowing for any sort of rates discussion into that. So the back end of both of those principles was designed around those sorts of scenarios where it makes sense to borrow, where there is a return unlinked to traditional sort of revenue sources. I think the other thing that the committee should consider really is that in order to understand the financial principles, they're all sort of interrelated, particularly with that first principle, which is the key to it all, which is getting back to that surplus position. So it sort of needs to be read in conjunction with those other principles in order to get that holistic picture. And underpinning all of that will be the ratios for the sector, which will drive, once we get to the numbers aspect, whether the plans that are presented as part of the long-term financial plan actually makes sound financial sense.
Well, I'd probably like to echo that. I'm happy and comfortable with what's in front of us in relation to debt. You know, my comment would probably be, if we want to increase it, convince myself, the committee and the council that it needs to be. There could be valid reasons to take out fluctuations in asset renewal without seeing the whole picture and how it fits in. It's good that there is a ceiling, but I think it's premature to, I suppose, start putting one behind the back, put a plan together without seeing the entire picture of what might be involved.
Well, if I don't agree, I agree with the strategy as it's expressed by the chief executive, but I don't believe that is completely reflected in the form of words in front of us. Right, for instance, with the water, fine, that's straightforward. But you know, when we come to the quarterly report, we're going to see once again this problem with the depreciation expense and it not being real. And so rates are being recovered, rates are being set to recover the depreciation expense, but the money's not being spent on depreciation expense. It's being spent elsewhere in the council. And you could find yourself in a situation where if you said, okay, well, we'll stop that. Yeah. So how are you going to fund it? So the only way is you can only fund by revenue or by debt. So you're going to have to raise debt. Now, I don't, obviously I don't support doing that under any circumstances, but in my judgment, the way that it's phrased at the moment, in one reading, you could say, yeah, well, it falls within the principles. Now, this isn't probably the time or place to be messing around with the words, but if anyone happens to agree with me, I'm happy to take some suggestions about how we might progress that. Councillor.
Well, I guess the opportunity would come through an amendment on Tuesday night or a change of wording for Tuesday's council meeting. So if there was more appropriate wording that we could come up with between now and Tuesday, then I'm happy to look at those and work with administration as to whether that resolves.
Thank you. I think my point is to get this notion of it being for capital into it. Yeah, it doesn't actually say that at the moment. So just something that generates a return. So that implies, I know, that it's a revenue generating activity, but it doesn't have to be capital. As I read it, but I'm not reading it differently from everyone else. I'm happy to defer.
I was just going to move on to other parts of the LTFP, if that's all right, Chair.
Well, yeah, but this might affect our resolution. Can we just see if we can sign off on this bit?
Chair, I don't have any magical words, unfortunately, for you to solve this. I understand your intent, which is to become more disciplined in terms of those long-term financial principles, and particularly around borrowings and not borrowing without any discipline around it. Certainly, the discussions with the chamber and their practice, this newly formed council over the last 12 months has shown that there isn't any borrowings that have been discussed around, not that don't have any sort of return attached to it. So I think there's the principle itself and the wording around that, and maybe there is an ability for us to tighten that. There's actual practice as well around decision making of the chamber itself. Our intention is that we'll take these principles at some stage and then build them into the council report, so that actually when discrete proposals or ideas are put forward, that we can actually measure that back against the principles that have been set. So I think there's, potentially if there is anything to do to tighten up the wording, then that's fine as well. But actually the practice itself of decision making is where we'll get the real value of it.
Yeah, it might do you any harm to get a bit of pushback from the committee though. Can I suggest this is one way of moving on would be for this committee to agree that the presiding member work with the chief executive or his nominees, to address the wording of Principle 2 and to come back with a circular resolution out of session for the committee to approve. I'll do it, we can do it tomorrow. I'm sorry? Yeah. Any other views?
I guess I support that, you've got more experience than I, so if you're concerned by the wording needing a bit of tightening, then I'm happy to support that.
Okay, thank you. So do we need a form of words?
Yeah, do you want to carry this one and then set?
Yeah, Desmond's suggesting we just do this as a separate resolution. So maybe I can just put this, that the ARC considered Principle 2 and resolved that the presiding member and council management work on developing an alternative form of words for ARC's consideration by way of circular resolution. Yeah, it's just tomorrow, it's not just a wording.
I'll just add to that, Chair. The council's going to consider it next Tuesday and the paper. So we can circulate a session, and it might be just on the night. One of the elected members here, if one's haven't seen it, might want to raise that at the meeting if they so choose to.
Yeah. So in other words, councillors will be relying on you. So resolution
So we need to go back to the first one. We've got one open. We've got a resolution, the first one open. That's
Okay, so we got,
carried.
yeah, no, we got the first one open, but we keep it open because there's other comments
Yeah,
that others
you can't,
want to
you
make.
can't have two on the table, so we need to finish this first one and then move the second one after.
Can't we move the second one first?
No, because we've got the first one moved and seconded.
Oh, I see.
That's live. This one's live.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
All right, so what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of this one that's in front of us at the bottom here.
I think-
No, it's the first one. We've got the one that's in yellow.
Yeah.
Yeah,
No, yeah, 1 and 2, yeah.
yep, 1 and 2.
I think Jordan had some more.
And we're going to add some words to,
You can't add.
oh, sorry, 4, yeah.
It's a solution to, as part of our comment in after 1, to say that the Audit and Risk Committee encourage council to tighten up its view on its level of debt as indicated in item 2.
Well, the only problem, there's a logical problem here, is as long as the council, I'd say, well, does the Audit Risk Committee approve the principles or not? Yeah, we can say to tighten up, but what does that actually mean? And so what I'm saying is that we have a very, very limited opportunity to just tidy up the wording on principle 2.
I suspect once the council develops a policy on what its debt is, that would come back by this committee for endorsement or comment on or otherwise.
Yeah, but won't that be after the event? How do we affect any outcome then?
And that was really the point I was going to make now, is that I appreciate the importance of this. It's probably one of the most important things we could be discussing, but the timeline that we're now under, and I compare and contrast that with Richard last night, first conversation, sort out feedback, they're going to come back to us in February, then it will go to council. Now, different situation, different council, different financial status. But I think we do need to get this right, and I'm keen to ensure that we do, and I appreciate the timelines, but they might just be a bit tight for it to be done as efficiently as possible to achieve the outcome. And I fully understand presiding members' views on that. But happy to help in any way out of session, of course.
Thank you. Councillor?
Yeah, I was going to suggest if we've got the initial recommendation and then you've got that one in yellow, it was like a second one. Can we have the one that you're suggesting, Chair? Can we have that as sort of number 3 in line, that you consider the principle 2 resolves that the presiding member of council management work and do for consideration to be works for ARC's consideration to be circulated, or rather than that, for the consideration of the council at their next meeting, because that's essentially what we're trying to do. You're trying to put some words together to perhaps enhance that second principle purely for the council to consider, because the papers and they've already gone out. So I think it's going to be important that if that's what you want to do, we need to get those words prepared so that we can.
Yeah, I think if others are happy with that, that's a good suggestion. I was going to say that we recommend to the council that it not consider the principles until we've had to, to take Paul's comment to its logical conclusion. Is if we can't do that, then I'd be proposing we recommend to council that it actually not consider these principles at this next meeting.
If by virtue of it coming here in our comments, it's seen as some enthusiastic adoption, then I think that would be unwise.
So we have 2 propositions before us. One is Councillor Yeoman's idea that we shift that form of words up and add it as point 3. We can't do that.
Well, if you're not happy with this one, that's on here, you can just vote it down and let it lose, and then you can vote for it.
So we can vote down the one that's in front of us and have a new resolution on the table, which will be the one that's in front of us plus the third one, as Councillor Yeoman's suggesting, right? Or we can, and in our view, the council should defer consideration of the principles.
Can I just ask the staff if there are any implications around the long-term financial principles being considered next week, if there is a deferral?
So through the chair, the idea is that the long-term financial plan principles will be adopted by council, and that would form the framework for the setting of the budget. And the budget process really kicks off in detail from January next year. Potentially that could be deferred if it needed to. It does seem to me from the discussion that that the main concern is around principle number 2. I'm not hearing at this stage, at least, any sort of uncertainty about the other principles. Certainly happy for that feedback to come back though if there is questions on the other principles. But from what I'm getting, it is around, how do we tighten that wording in principle number 2 to make it really clear that the use of debt, the use of additional debt is, for investment purposes, something along those lines. So, could we change the wording and, would it be acceptable to the committee members for 2A, for example, to be, adopt a dollar value debt ceiling for the long-term financial plan is finalised in June 24. However, additional debt for capital investment purposes can be accessed where there is a financial return. So these are just adding in those words that might, do what you're looking for, Chair.
That's well done. That goes a long way towards addressing my concern. I've got to tell you, that form of words.
So through the chair, if that was acceptable to the committee members, we could have that as a, and Karen, you can talk us through the process, but have that as an alternative, as an amendment to the recommendation that principle number 2 is changed to reflect what we've just spoken about.
Well, what we could do is, as the advice that we've got, is we could reject what's in front of us, then have what's in front of us put again together with your form of words, Jade, and we could resolve that. And that would do it for me. I'm in the hands of others here.
I think that's a good way to go. The only comment I was going to raise is further down around the idea of growth, and if the independent members had any way of recommending better words to convey growth in number 3, but that was just going to be my next discussion item. Is growth is always a challenge for everybody to understand, and when we put it in a principle as something that we want people to understand, just becomes a challenge.
Good point. Is there any comment on?
It's not unusual to have that principle long-term financial plan, given some of the growth in new subdivisions proposed, particularly in this council area. Having sit on Campbelltown, it's gone through a hell of a lot of infill growth over the last period of time. It's certainly including a conservative estimate of what growth is going to be in the long-term financial plan, and they've averaged out what they've had over the last 5 years to determine what the next might look like. And given, as I say, some of the major subdivisions here, it's going to be a significant figure to work out how that's calculated. That probably should be included in the long-term financial plan, both in growth from a revenue perspective, but also from an expenditure perspective. The easy one is you get growth in waste levy, but you're a waste charge, but you also have costs associated with it. And so he was looking on both sides of the equation as well.
Yeah, but I take Councillor Pritchard's point. Just the word growth there, without any adjectives, could mean just about anything. I mean, I assume that what we're talking about is great growth in the rateable revenue, rateable base.
Through the chair, if I may add to Councillor Pritchard's point, could we expand principle 3? So rather than just saying plus growth, that its revenue is increased at least in line with CPI plus revenue from new properties. So really just expand out what growth is. And of course, in the long-term financial plan document, these principles will be accompanied by some explanatory statements. And in there, we can go into more detail about what growth is, being that revenue from the new properties.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we're after, because it's just I guess the audience for the long-term financial plan, if it is the community, then everybody I've spoken to hasn't understood what growth is until it's explained and how it works. So if it's a headline principle, then I think it needs to be understandable to the majority of people in its first reading.
I think you're going to be pensioners by the year end, Jade. You're pretty good with formulating those words. I'm very fine with that. You're okay? Yeah. All right. Well, is that discussion on all the principles concluded?
Can I just ask one? I'm just trying to get this number 2. Thanks for your explanation. Can I just ask some advice? Which do you prefer? Which would you prefer? So we've got the debt. The number 2B talks about obviously putting in that 138.5 million. Number 2, you're obviously going to have some flexibility there because you're working whether that figure will be more appropriately assessed at the end of the financial year. So have you got a view either way? Because it's
Through the chair, not wanting to speak on behalf of everybody, but personally, and as working with Jade, responsible for finance, we definitely believe that a debt ceiling is required and appropriate and sets the parameters for what and how we operate. The issue that we've got with 2B is the $138.5 million was a ceiling in a long-term financial plan that had a lot of assumptions in it. And a lot of those assumptions now 3 to 4 years on have not come to fruition. So is the $138.5 million fit for purpose and the correct number? We don't know that currently. So our preference would be that 2A, we go on this journey over the next 6 months, updating and overhauling all the assumptions and the underlying items within the long-term financial plan. Then we'll be able to we will work with the chamber on what some of the scenarios look like and what the levers are. And then once we've done that work and we know what 138.5 or whatever other number means and what that'll mean for capital delivery and everything else going forward, we make an informed decision and we select a number at that point. So it's a very long way of saying that 2A is probably the preference. Yep.
I just have one more question around the LTFP in general. Was obviously asset rationalisation of $3 million annually was one of the key principles previously. Now we're looking to remove that, and I think that's completely valid. But my question is, if we have some assets rationalised in the future, do we want to have a principle around what we're going to do with that money, or are we? I guess that's the question.
So whilst through the chair, the last long-term financial plan had the 16 principles, and that was one of them. Is it a principle that we will divest X amount of dollars per year? It's probably not a principle, it's an assumption. So as a chamber, once again, when we go through this process, we can choose whether we have that assumption in the numbers as opposed to a principle. However, if you wanted to have a principle around how you spent any proceeds, that would be a different point altogether. And that would be, I guess, up for consideration of elected members.
What the questions are that sort of flesh out where you want to go before you do something.
Yeah. I think the idea, if I'm getting it right, is that the principle would be that all proceeds from asset divestments would be applied to debt retirement, isn't it?
Well, I think that was implied in that, and that was, well, it wasn't implied, it was explicit in some of in the asset rationalisation document. And my understanding is that caused some of the challenges with skepticism in the community, that the only reason we were selling things was because we wanted to retire debt rather than to benefit the community. So I actually wouldn't have it in there as a principle to that's what we're going to do, because I think if we're looking to divest something, then there should be a line of sight benefit to the community that it's being divested from, rather than paying back decisions from the past.
Through you, Chair, if I can add to that, I mean, certainly from David's response there, I certainly think financially, if that was a principle, would be very strong for the financials of the organisation. Understanding though where elected members are at and their desire for broader outcomes than just debt reduction, I think it'd be probably a false assumption to put in there in terms of limiting what the options may be, because it actually might be about divesting or giving it off to someone else to get some other outcomes, not just the debt repayment. So I think that's probably best handled on a case by case basis, even though if that was written in there, that would obviously be quite a compelling one. I think we need to keep some flexibility for elected members to decide around that. I do think also that the framework which we operate in here in South Australia around land holdings isn't conducive to us being able to move very quickly around our land holdings. So certainly as part of the upcoming budget process, there's some ideas that we've got around how we might be able to create an environment that makes it a little bit easier for options to be realised quicker should the chamber choose to do so. So I think for the moment, it's probably not a principle that the administration would look to add, just because it doesn't give us enough flexibility at this point in time.
Can I just say I'm happy with that, because I'm also mindful of the role of the committee. The process here is that the administration's put together a set of principles and they're to be approved by the elected members. On the way through, the committee can do a couple of things. First of all, it can suggest some modification, and secondly, draw elected members' attention to anything that it believes wants it. I think we're within those bounds with what we've done to date, but I think we might cross those bounds where we just start thinking about, firm principles about what proceeds from asset sales might be applied to. And I don't think any of us would want a situation whereby that the status of the document was changed such that it became a set of principles from the ARC and not from the administration. So if you're of that mind, I think I agree with the chief executive about leaving that flexibility and leaving that principle there, but I don't think we're about to step the mark by adding the things that we're about to vote on. Does that make sense to him? Yeah? Okay, so now, you paying attention?
Yes, I'm trying to get them to read.
Right, so we've got this resolution in front of us,
Yep.
that was moved and seconded, I think, and so
It's up to the committee.
that's right. So we've now got to say all those in favour, and none of us are to vote in favour of it.
No, you can't leave from the chair.
How many years are there? So I'm learning. Okay. All right, all those in favour? No one, thank you. So the resolution is rejected. We now have a replacement resolution. Which is, let's just have a close read for a moment. Okay, can I just... We've got 2A and 2B in there. Do we still want that?
Yeah,
Yeah, okay, yep, no, I'm just asking the question, yeah. Someone moves that we adopt this resolution?
I'll move it.
Yep, second. Paul, thank you all. All those in favour?
Who seconded that?
Paul, yeah. Thanks very much. So that deals with that agenda item. Now, with the benefit of that, we can move, I suggest we move on to item 7.2, the quarterly report. David, do you want to talk? Oh, sorry, David, James.
So through the chair, again, happy for this report to be taken as read. Due to timing, this report was presented to council for the November council meeting and BR1 was adopted. So this report is being provided for information purposes to Audit and Risk Committee, but certainly any discussion can be taken on board for future budget reviews and council consideration.
Thank you. Now, before I invite comments,
Just make sure that's, ask all the questions, make sure that's what they want to move before you move it.
yeah, so what we've got in front of us that we, as Jade rightly says, is that we note these reports. So do we need something to resolve? Yeah.
If they want to move it, that's good.
Oh, sorry,
If you want to ask
it's
questions.
two parts. First, we ask questions. And I'll invite questions, then we move it, and then we have substantive discussion, right?
Correct.
Yep. So first of all, are there any questions?
Yeah, I've got one.
Councillor Cummins.
Oh, Councillor Lemons.
Yeah, just the number 2 says, however, in circumstances where the time of the meeting is not online, the quarterly report will be provided to the committee after going to the council for information. So the only thing, my question on that one would be what would be the benefit of, I feel strongly that the report should be through this committee before they go to council. And the reason I say that is working through the papers, and this was a question I was going to ask later, but it's probably timely I can bring it up here, is that I think it's really important that when Councillor Pritchard and I are at those council meetings and things have gone through the ARC, you can actually then sort of perhaps provide some assurance, which is one of the roles of the ARC anyway, is to provide that advice. So I'm not sure how you can provide the advice afterwards. So my question is, because I'm sorry, Karen, I'm messing around here. My question is, what would be the circumstances when the meetings don't align? Surely we can work something out in our planning that these reports go to the ARC before they go to the council.
I think through the chair, the only thing I would say that Councillor Yeomans is really, linking up the timing between ARC meetings and council meetings is one thing. The other thing that we sometimes get criticised for is the delay between producing the reports to the public, because ultimately this is a report to the community as well, and trying to do that in a timely manner. So you either got to line up the ARC meetings and change them around so that it can still achieve that objective of timely reporting to the community, or the model we've got at the moment, which is our focus to get it to the community as quickly as possible and then inform the ARC. So it's doable, but it's certainly, I'm just conscious that we don't want a quarterly result and then have to potentially have a month or two later and then the community get upset with us about not being timely and transparent around our financials as soon as possible.
If I could just indicate, I agree with Councillor. This is an issue with other councils. This is not the only council that has these challenges, of course, and inevitably it happens once at least. But we had a meeting in October, and I'm just wondering, we're not close to being in a position to have had this material, and it was so close. In the future, we could just schedule it another week or so. Because these are end of September, the meeting was in the second week of October. I realize that's not a lot of time, but I'm just talking, we're not really talking about a huge amount of difference. So if that were a week or so, if we start planning, we can change this. But if we can plan around that, because I struggle, I appreciate what you're saying, But I think the community also expects that the Audit and Risk Committee does its job and is given an opportunity to do so. So I wonder whether we could look at the timing in future. This is not the only council that this is an issue, and inevitably there's always one that sort of becomes problematic from timing. But I just wonder about this, given we actually scheduled a special meeting. And it's more a comment for future.
So through the chair, realistically, the earliest that we can provide the information is probably in the first week of the month after. So if we're talking end of September results, it would be the first week of November. That by the time it goes, because we're collating actuals, so we're providing variance analysis against our actual result, as well as the budget review outcomes as well, and then going through our internal approval process. So realistically, and we can certainly look at rescheduling the ARC meetings to be prior to the council meetings. We would just need to have another look at the work plan.
So it sounds like that is actually the cause of the significant chunk of it, not so much the time that it comes here and then goes to council. I appreciate that's still an optic that you've got to manage, but
through the chair, how we've managed this in the past is to have this. So, for example, the budget review 2 report will go to the February council meeting. Generally, the Audit and Risk Committee meeting has been the week prior. So, again, similar timeframes in terms of not a lot of time between ARC and council, but certainly time for ARC to have a review, provide some feedback, which can be verbally passed on to council ahead of them making a decision.
Which is better than at least this situation. Absolutely.
I think we'd like to take you up on that suggestion about the timing of the ARC meetings, if we could. Yeah, just a small thing. We insist. I don't know that reports need to be prepared for us, particularly. We simply saw the report that had been prepared to go to council. Surely that does the job, doesn't it?
Through the chair, that is what happens now.
Yeah. Okay. All right. I'll phrase this as a question. This important decision here, it seems to me, that, this is a report, which so it's like, keeping the score. But buried in it is the potential for important decisions. The background I'm used to is that carry forwards do not get approved, usually. And they certainly don't get approved as a matter of course. Is that the City of Oncopinga's practice is different from that?
So through the chair, generally carry forwards would be reviewed by council and approved. We've rarely, in my experience, had times where carry forwards or individual projects have not been approved for carry forward.
Okay. Is there debate about it in the chamber?
Through the chair, there can be some levels of debate about it.
Okay. Are there any other questions? Thank you.
The only thing I was going to say in relation to the recommendations was whether we look to not have number 2, because number 2 does provide that opportunity for the vice versa.
Yeah.
And if the committee feels strongly that, or feels as if it's more appropriate for the reports to come to the committee before they actually present it to council, so you've got an opportunity to comment and validate and reassure. To me, there's not much point having number 2 there.
Discussion? So, are you just suggesting we resolve part 1 and drop part 2? Yep. I think we've got to finish with the questions before you jump the gun. I think we've got to finish with the questions before we can do that, don't we?
You can keep asking questions at any time.
Okay. Yeah, very good. So is anybody else got, I've got 2 or 3 questions.
Well, obviously, maybe it's the help Karen if I move number 1.
Yep. Second. All those in favour? Okay. So.
Yep, that's it. Finish with that. Next item. Next item.
No, let's talk about item 2. I can see I can ask my questions, can't I? Yeah? Okay. When payovers are advised, is the impact and depreciation expense advised too?
Through the chair, it's probably not explicitly called out in the report when we're talking about the impact of carry forwards. But we can certainly make that clearer in the reports about that depreciation impact. I think generally with the depreciation, because we capitalise projects as they are completed, that impact can be somewhat hard to calculate or quantify because we are looking at the timing of when works are scheduled to be done. But certainly for our next carry forward report, we can make an estimate and make sure that that is provided for in the reports.
Thank you. What's the problem with this technology one contract?
So through the chair, we've noted in the report that the Technology One contract for actuals had been expensed into operating. However, because we are still in the implementation of the last stage of the project, we are able to capitalise a portion of that fee. So there will be an adjustment that will be reflected in the next report where we are capitalising a portion. So removing that from operating and putting it into capital.
Okay, thanks.
Oh, you're fine. I just wanted to know the year-to-date project expense of seems like we've only spent or only 55% of capital project spending, which is on page 45. Is that a bit low? Is there an issue there?
So through the chair, those figures are reporting against the formally approved budget, which was the original budget plus carry forwards. So the original budget plus carry forwards gave us a gross capital spend of about $104 million, which we know we're not going to spend. So as part of budget review 1, we have removed $37 million gross capital spend to be timed in the future years. So the 45% capital spend is probably about right, given that we knew that some projects would need to be retimed just because it's not physically possible to deliver that much capital works.
Now, I've got the question about the grants and subsidies. Can I just be really clear on what's happening here? The favourable variance due to the final 22-23 to our payment being received in August. Okay, so we didn't budget to receive it in 23-24. Yeah, but it has been. So that's favourable for 23-24, but unfavourable for 22-23. Yeah. So really offset partially by the financial assistance grant 23-24, which was paid in advance, received in June 23. So that was a $10 million favourable variance for 22-23. And compared with budget, will now be unfavourable for 23-24.
So through the chair, it was about a $5 million favourable variance for 22-23. And yes, at the moment it is showing as an unfavourable variance against 23-24. Now, depending on what the Commonwealth does in terms of the timing of the payment of the financial assistance grant at the end of this financial year, will be when we know if it is like a permanent 23-24 unfavourable variance or simply a timing only. Part of the problem with the financial assistance grant, and we've certainly written letters to the Minister, and it's a sentiment shared by all councils, is that the unknown timing of when we receive that money and the fact that we need to recognise it as income in the year that it's received as opposed to when it's spent can have some distortion on our financial position, particularly as that is meant to be an in advance payment for the next financial year.
Yeah, but none of this affects the accounts for 22-23, the statutory accounts, yeah?
Through the chair, it doesn't change the numbers in the statutory reports, no.
Yeah, okay. So I suppose the obvious question I have is that we're on track for another deficit. Yeah. That's I think seven consecutive years. Yeah. So we've got a business plan. Yeah. But it seems to keep running into rocky roads. Are we budgeting enough surplus in the out years? Are we reducing costs enough? Because it seems to, when I can observe, it seems that our budgeting is so finely balanced is that when it comes to whether we're a surplus or deficit, we're not very resilient to shocks. Is that a reasonable assessment?
Through the chair, there's no doubt as an organisation we have a structural deficit issue. We were forecast or budgeted to have a $1.9 million deficit this year. As of BR1, that's gone out sort of to 3.3, but explainable mainly through grants and revenue and pushing out those renewable projects. However, we are doing a major overhaul of both the long-term financial plan, the strategic asset management plan, and the community plan, but that doesn't really relate to what we're talking about. Where number of sessions with elected members and addressing that structural issue and the gap, because I guess not only are we sort of starting behind the game this year, if we wanted to move from the 1.9 to breaking even, there's some additional pressures that we already are aware about that's, you know, making that gap bigger than that number. So there's no doubt that over recent years, depreciation has had a huge impact on our organisation, which is an accounting entry. It's non-cash, but it has increased a lot and sort of added to our issue. But coming back to my first statement, there is a structural issue there. Management, the directors group, the CEO, we're currently looking at all the different measures that are going to help us address that. We're going to take all of those measures to the chamber to see what is palatable and what's not and what's acceptable, and agree on a way forward on how we are going to return to surplus. And as per those long-term financial plan principles that we covered off in the last report, a sustainable position. So not just one-offs, just some decisions that need to be made around what we do and how we do it.
Yeah, I understand, and that's comforting. When we go to council, do we draw the distinction between financial sustainability and financial resilience? Because seems to me that when I've read the business plans and so on, that they seem to meet the requirements of financial sustainability. But as I say, we seem to be working in such a finely balanced proposition that it means when the inevitable happens, that immediately translates itself into another loss. So what I'm asking is whether council generates a consciousness about not just sustainability, but about resilience. Yeah.
I might contribute something there, Chair. I was just looking for our elected members, see if they wanted to comment on it. Yeah, absolutely spot on around financial resilience. Certainly COVID was a prime example, and I'm not talking about City of Onkaparinga, but for the sector as a whole, and private sector for that matter, in terms of the impacts that it had on the financials. I'd love the council to get to a point, baby steps first, which is to get to break-even position, but then looking beyond that, growing our revenues at a faster pace than our expenses, and then putting aside some funding for reserves cash-backed, which will allow that buffer to deal with any headwinds that might head our way. We're certainly a long way from that position today. but there are opportunities that we're unpacking that will be presented to the elected members in the next cycle. And there's going to be plenty of ideas generated there where some difficult decisions will need to be made. So we're doing that, and we're certainly encouraged by long-term financial principles that support that decision making, and hoping that our elected members and ours between elected members and the management, that we're disciplined to be able to get to that position. But you're spot on about the resilience. That's probably a step beyond just getting to break even, and that's certainly, from my perspective, a worthy aspiration.
Thank you. Well, I'll just give some things a little bit here and say, I've got to try to put it in the question. Perhaps in doing that, I think you can sense the mood of the committee. Perhaps in doing that, you might care to give some thought to any ways in which something from this committee could help you in that effort, and come to us, and we'd be only too happy to help.
Yeah, through the chair, perhaps the elected members that are part of this committee convey that intent of the ARC in terms of that financial resilience back through the chamber when we get to those discussions around setting our budget settings for future cycles.
Yeah, does that work? Yep. Thank you. Okay. So I think technically we're up to number 2, isn't it?
We're finished with that one.
We've actually finished with the agenda item.
So we'll go to 7.3.
7.3. Internal audit update. Anyone speaking to that?
Through the chair, I'm happy for the report to be taken as read.
Yep. Is there anything you'd like to add?
Probably to note is the proposal for the 2024-27 Internal Audit Charter and Plan, which has been developed on risk identification and discussion with internal stakeholders, and also discussions with Council's current internal auditor. And yeah, that's probably it.
So any discussion?
Just a comment on the 2024-27 internal audit plan. It didn't seem anything in relation to cyber in relation to it. I think as we previously indicated, some of the, unless I'm missing it, of course, which I'll stand corrected. Seemed to be one of the gaps missing, and probably one of the emerging issues around is having done a review of information that you collect and store from a privacy aspect, and what might be when you're collecting the information, what the exposure might be, just to get ahead of some of the impending
So through the chair, in the current plan for 2021-24, we do have the ICT disaster recovery, which is planned for March, which would include consideration of cybersecurity threats, and also the privacy and data governance internal audit scheduled for completion in June 2024, covering information governance and ICT.
My apologies, I missed that one.
All good.
Councillor.
I had a few comments through the update. I guess just starting with the plan development, I would have expected or liked to have seen where elected members were considered or consulted for what items they might have wanted audited. Is that ever been considered previously?
Through the chair, we deduced the plan based on where our area of most risk falls, and we have quite a small budget for internal audit. I think if there are items out there that the public are concerned about or elected members are concerned about that they want us to look at, we can look at those through an own initiative review. And we have an operational excellence team within council that can perform those sorts of reviews in conjunction with corporate governance. But our position has been to determine the internal audits based upon where our greatest area of risk lies.
I did know that I thought 4 of the first 5 were pretty good, so that's on page 92, risk 3 talked about engagement in the community. I guess we've had a recent community survey, and there's been a significant drop in cultural diversity importance in the community. And we, as a council chamber, are still working through the terms of reference for our First Nations People Advisory Group, which has been ongoing for a while. I guess my question is that the risk seems to be getting realised at the moment, and is there, how do we act on risks that are, I guess, being realised currently, such as that one? And there's a couple of other ones there.
So through the chair, the risks identified in the Internal Audit Charter and Plan are actually part of the strategic risks that come back to the committee quarterly. So what we could do is consider any feedback provided and take that into consideration for the next strategic risk report that comes back. And actually that's the full review of those risks. Would that assist?
Yeah, I might just add to that. I think, Councillor, I think what you're alluding to is some of the work that we're doing around, First Nations people and that advisory group. There's also work we're doing in the background around our reconciliation action plan, what the next version of that might look like, as well as some other sort of related pieces of work. My discussions with the team around this has been that we need to have an EM session, and let's start with the work that we're currently doing afoot. I think as part of that discussion, it'd be good to clarify where council's role is and where we can make best impact. But you're certainly right in terms of a risk there that is lingering, not just for us, but more broadly in the community. So we're keen to have that workshop early in the new year. I'm sort of thinking it's probably late January, early February to come back on some of the progress around that work. The First Nations People Advisory Group work is also happening in the background, but again, there's a bit more work to be done there, and that was reported to the STC this week. So I think we need to bring all those pieces together and have a conversation with the elected members early in the new year on this issue.
I guess so risk 10, which is on page 95, was around the long-term financial plan and having sustainable financial settings. We've got an inherent of high and a residual of low on that risk. And I guess to take the chair's point, we've had 7 deficits in a row. Again, are we doing enough in that space to address that risk? And is that, or am I reading these charts incorrectly that so we've identified a low residual risk, but the risk is occurring consistently?
So through the chair, certainly there's a number of controls that are in place. However, as you've rightly pointed out, we know that our financial position has not been in a great position for some years, and we're certainly making efforts to remedy that, particularly through the next long-term financial plan review. The principles are a start, but as I mentioned before, understanding the assumptions and the strategies that will go into what we need to do to change our financial position is going to be a really key part of that.
Yeah, I was just going to ask that risk 5 on page 92. Yeah, it's about the emergency management planning stuff.
Mhm.
The risk rating was extreme and your residuals medium, and I'd take that point if your crisis management arrangements were up to date, but we just heard the report wasn't. So I guess that's my point. I'm not sure how we can have that residual rating of down from extreme down to medium when our plans were not up to date. So it's probably just more of a comment than anything. On page 95, the risk was number 11, risk 11. I just wonder whether the controls have been tested since 2021 to validate again the residual risk rating from medium to medium from high. Just got here, previous years audits were back in 21, so I'm just wondering whether we've had anything since then to validate that reduction in that risk. And if you can't answer, that's
through the chair, we have the ICT team has recently undertaken a series of cyber testing, including penetration testing and taking systems offline and seeing how fast they come back up. So it is definitely something that's in train and front of mind. There's also been a lot of work done on cybersecurity plans. So we are trying to stay ahead of the people that are a little bit smarter than we are.
Just before we move off that risk, can I just ask a question about cyber security? Do we look after all of our needs internally?
Through the chair, I'm not an ICT expert by any means, but my understanding is that we have run one internally, but we've also had external parties doing testing for us.
Yeah, no, I'm just thinking about planning and defences and so on. As we all know, these are very, very sophisticated operations. And it wouldn't make much sense to me for 67 South Australian councils to each have their own capability or try and have their own capability in that. And so I was just wondering to what extent there was either some sort of pooling or some external resource that we can access.
I'd have to take that on notice and get some information from the ICT manager. I know there is a group of ICT professionals across local government that meet and discuss things regularly, but and noting also that councils don't always have the same systems, so requirements would vary, but I'm happy to get more information for the committee.
Sure, but if it goes wrong, as we all know, that what happens then is it cascades down to a bunch of other questions like why were you retaining this information about each ratepayer, the date of birth or something? And so we're ready for that.
So that will be part of the privacy audit as well, but
Okay.
Any further information I'd need to get from the ICT manager.
Can I just ask the next time we deal with something like this that maybe the ICT manager could be given an opportunity to put in a paragraph or two? The council, sorry.
That's right. Just around project 3 for the one council project. It comes up quite a few times in attachment 3. And I did note that later on in the internal financial controls, it was listed as being implemented by the end of 23-24. Is that on track, Glenn?
Through the chair, so the current plan is to go live with project 3. We're saying end of February, but there's 29 days in February and that is a Thursday. We need a weekend to cut over and do all that stuff. So we'll actually be going live on the 4th of March, that Monday. So that is the current timeline for going live on project 3.
Fantastic. I've got a few questions on it, which I'll just ask separately outside of the Parkland. Page 129, there was a comment around increase in ranger services and that risk was increasing. Certainly my interactions with with that requirement having increased in the last bit of time as well. So just, I guess I'm just supporting that risk seems to be increasing, and I think a number of the elected members are having to utilise the range of services consistently through a lot more homelessness, unauthorised camping and caravan parks, more beach issues, more parking infringements, and the increase in aggressive behaviour. My last one, sorry, page 125. An asset management steering committee. This is the first time I've heard of this, and I see that it was supported by council management in October 2022. Is the commentary on, is that ready to be delivered, or is it really needed?
Through the chair, so this was a recommendation of the KPMG audit on the asset management plans. I don't believe that it has commenced as yet, but we can get a further update from that area.
Okay, so any other questions?
Yeah, just on page, just on page 123. That one of that outstanding action was overdue as of the 30th of 11/22, but the current status was something that was a notation there on the 31st of July 23. The property teams commence some workshops and mapping and whatever. I'm just wondering whether they've actually have taken place, because if that's what we're waiting for, if they have taken place, whether that one might not be outstanding, and that might be something you can't answer now, but I'm just asking the question. Yeah.
So through the chair, the operational excellence team have actually been working with the property transactions team and have undertaken workshops in May with regards to mapping of business processes, including the work that they're involved in contaminated land, cemeteries, leases and permits. They've got other workshops planned. However, it has been postponed due to the One Council Project 3 user acceptance testing, because it will impact on those processes that are being mapped.
Okay.
So that's the update provided.
Thank you.
Yep. So what we have in front of us, two recommendations. Is that we received a note, the quarterly update report, and secondly, that it provides the following feedback. I guess someone wants to move and second this resolution, and then we can discuss what that following feedback might be, can't we?
Happy to so move. So it has to put in the feedback and then you second it.
Oh, I see.
Yeah.
Okay, so whoever moves has got to put in whatever feedback we want to provide. What's the view? Councillor?
I think some of the feedback needs to be that we're eagerly awaiting project 3 of the One Council project.
Project 3 of the one. Okay.
So does that mean Councillor Pritchard's the mover? Right. So Councillor Pritchard's moved the motion sheet. Is someone seconding? Yep, Councillor Young, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. All right. Thank you for that. 7.4 we've dealt with, which brings us to 7.5, Prudential Management Policy. So any questions about Prudential Management Policies? Can I just ask a question, if there isn't, can I just ask a question about the intent here to make sure I've got it right? As I understand it, the idea is to isolate particularly significant decisions, either CapEx or OpEx, and then apply an additional oversight to it being in the form of Prudential Management Policy?
Through the chair, yes, that is correct.
Okay.
And it's required under the legislation.
Yeah. Councillor.
I was just gonna, for the prominent members, we've had one report come through so far in the last 12 months around, which was a Prudential policy for the upgrade of the hub gymnastics, because it was over the financial threshold. That one seemed to go through okay.
Yeah. So any other discussion on this?
No, I think they'd be good if they are on the webpage.
I'm sorry.
I think those reports would be good if they're on the webpage. Yeah.
Yep. Okay, so our job's to recommend approval by council of the recommendation. Someone like to move that? Well, thank you. Second. Andrew?
Happy to second.
Second, thank you. All right, so that brings us to internal financial control self-assessment.
I'm going to carry it.
Oh, all those in favour? Okay. Thank you. So, so agenda item 7.6 is the financial self-assessment. So, any need for what's the discussion here? Sorry, I'm just finding it here.
Yeah, I'm happy to move the motion. It's good to see that there's no high risk audits or self-assessments. They're all effective or majorly effective. So I'm happy to move the motion.
Thank you, Andrew. Second? Yep, Paul, thank you. All those in favour? Thank you. Now the next item is the HMS return to work annual report.
Can I just make a comment before we start that item, Mr. Chair? I have heard a declaration of interest in relation to this item, given that I'm the current CEO of LGSA Mutual that looks after the workers' compensation scheme, and it's probably inappropriate given that some of it the report refers to the workers' compensation scheme, and given the perception of me being in the room or participating in the debate that I might not be impartial. As a result, I'll go for a walk and leave the meeting.
Don't walk too far. So we're being asked to note this report. So any discussion or anything anyone from the administration wants to say?
Yeah, I was just going to ask one question.
Yeah.
And early interventions a key component to managing a worker's injury for sure. I'm just wondering what are the timelines, if any, for reporting an injury and for managers to review the reports? And is there a policy to ensure compliance and is this monitored? Yeah.
Through the chair, I can probably answer that question for you. There is an incident management procedure that requires incidents to be reported within a 24-hour period. They're triaged by the WHS team as soon as practical to do that. Investigations have timelines before they need to be started, and depending on the complexity and the severity of that particular injury or incident, depends on the level and depth of that investigation. anything with an injury that's involved or a medium to high risk, the WHS team participate and drive that investigation to support leaders to do that and come up with root cause analysis and reasonable actions to try and mitigate that going forward.
Councillor.
I guess I had a few questions around the actual statistics. Just, I guess, 153, just to start with, 153 injuries across the 12 months is, you know, almost one every 2 days, and 151 property damages is very similar. I understand the trending of the KPIs, but what's the goal of the organisation, and do we find those numbers acceptable?
There are organisational, through the chair, there are some organisational WHS KPIs, and ultimately zero harm would be the aspiration for sure. But we do track lost time. So we have a couple of lag indicators that measure lost time frequency rate, which is really the lost time injuries against the million hours worked. That gives us a number so we can match apples for apples. And we do the same thing with total recordable injuries, which is where you've got lost time and medical treated together. So again, it looks at the severity of the injury, whereas you may have an injury that I've cut my finger and there's no lost time. So it's important to note that many incidents or injuries are report only, and the actual lost time and medical treated injuries are of the lower scale. And given the complexity and higher risk work this council does in relation to construction work and field operations work, benchmarking across other councils is difficult because they don't necessarily necessarily do that high level of risk work that we do here. So that has been our challenge, because we are the largest council and the more complex of our service delivery mechanism. So it is a challenge to find out what our benchmark is against other councils.
I guess, I mean, I've got a background in SA Power Networks as well, so, and team leadership and looking after these sort of numbers, and understand a lot of those acronyms. I guess in addition to that, it's the 13 service notifiable incidents, and I know that they are a big concern around the industry. Is there a specific action plan that's been put into place to address those?
Through the chair, yes. We've been very closely monitoring those, and we've noticed there's been an increase. And each incident, as I said, is investigated. So those particular circumstances are drilled down for root cause, and for that particular event, there's actions put in place. And we've continued to do that, and we've actually increased our support in relation to those investigations, making sure we have a senior business partner attending and driving all those investigations. But on a holistic note, we've noticed that increasing trend. So we've got an operational excellence workshop running to try and help work through that and what that looks like, rather than at a localised level. Is there other bigger factors at play that we can perhaps integrate and drive through other mechanisms within council to make improvements in that space, because it is a high risk area and it is an area of concern.
And are those statistics just City of Onkaparinga employees, or is it subcontractors or sub labour, and does it just cover council business, or is SWARA statistics included in any of these?
Through the chair, our general incident reporting data is council workers only. When we look at those notifiable service, we do consider our contractors and if we've contracted out that service, because ultimately we are a PCBU in some way, shape or form. Mm-hmm. So we do capture that, and we look for that, because what is our part to play in managing that risk to council? So they do include our contractor incidents. SWARA is not part of our reporting at all. It's a separate entity from that perspective.
Just a couple other ones, sorry. I noticed the 21,415 hazard IDs, which is a great number. but only 89 workplace inspections to go along with that. So I was just wondering if there was any correlation between having someone identify hazards and then having someone else come and do a workplace inspection on that.
Through the chair, the hazard ID process here is quite complex and in depth. And the workplace inspection number is actually the workplace inspections conducted within our buildings. So that's why there's only 89. And in fact, that's on a roster schedule basis. So they're rostered over a period of time and leaders do them. The other hazard IDs that are talked about as pre-starts and JHAs, job hazard analysis, are done by our field operations staff at the beginning of a job. So literally every time they do a job, they do a hazard ID process and they identify those hazards. So it's different in nature. Then we also have a work site inspection. So where a construction site may be setting up to do a particular job, we also conduct work site inspections to make sure that they're doing what they're supposed to be doing and capturing any of those identified risks. And putting in controls to mitigate that. So we try and pull them out because community is very different space to our field operations, and we try to capture both areas, and so operations don't get wrapped up in the mess of, you know, the whole conglomerate of all of that. So it is a bit tricky in that sense.
I'll just go with one more. Some of the descriptions on page 180 in the paragraph of some of the incidents that we've had sound quite scary, is the description I used. There was hit by a moving object, trapped by machinery, hit by a falling object. Do we classify any fatal risk events separately, or have we ever considered like a fatal risk event type metric? Because certainly a way that SA Power networks have gone over recent times is to pull those out.
Through the chair, that pie graph is what we call a mechanism of injury. It's not the outcome of the mechanism. So this is what's causing the incident or what's happened to drive the outcome. Certainly, we don't have the number of fatalities that would warrant a separate, because we would call that out if there was a fatality, because that would be an outcome and it certainly would be beyond a lost time injury. So that would be called out very separately. The mechanism of that fatality would still be captured in this pie graph of whatever that was. So these are standard descriptors based on government standards that have been set out, and they're within our SkyTrust system that we use to record our incidents, so we can get general data that we can map, we can track against. So you know, it's apples for apples. Each incident is viewed and reviewed for the mechanisms of injury, and we can track that, and we can track that over time so that we can see over years where's our areas of problem, where's our areas that we need to focus on. The same with locations of where do we need to focus. It helps us drive our energies and our direction and our efforts to where it needs to be, to our highest risk or our highest incident rates.
Okay, thanks.
Is any further questions? So we've been asked to note this report only. Someone like to move that? All thank you. Second. Councillor Pritchard, thank you. All those in favour? Okay, thank you.
Get some, Andrew.
Oh, yeah, thanks. Councillor. So our next item is the corporate risk review, where we are being asked to note the report and note the fact that they are being monitored. Is there any questions on this? Councillor.
I just had a couple that just around the timings. There was one around council workers are using private vehicles, risk 75 on page 194. Just wondering why council workers are using private vehicles still.
Through the chair, there's a few reasons. We have greatly reduced our passenger fleet. So there's less passenger vehicles available for staff to use to take to meetings. We have introduced what's called a grey fleet policy and procedure. So that puts some rigour around staff using their own vehicles. There was also novated leases introduced, so there was a cut down of vehicles that were offered through management contracts. And also, if we have staff members, for instance, that live in the north of the area and have to go into the city in the morning to be at a meeting at 9 o'clock, it's more efficient for them to take their own vehicle rather than booking a vehicle, coming in here and then going into the city. We've also been encouraging the use of public transport more so than the use of vehicles. And obviously there's mechanisms in our enterprise agreement that are available for staff to use their own vehicles with the approval of their manager and then be reimbursed for costs.
Thank you. And there was just a couple around the water business unit and the CWMS, risk 77 and 78. Just wondering whether those risk profiles will change now that the water asset's been retained.
Through the chair, as it currently stands today, obviously we've recently had a decision of council to retain the assets. We have identified through the retained case the risks and opportunities associated with those assets, and then as we, into next year and beyond, work through those and implement those, and we will see that status change. But as it stands today, nothing has changed. But I'd envisage that in 2024 it will.
Councillor?
Yeah, just on page 193, there was the risk in relation to the grant funding. I'm just asking where council services are reliant on grants. Are these services prioritised in the event that some services may need to be discontinued if grant funding is not forthcoming and council's not in a financial position to fund those services?
Sorry, what was the question?
Just wondering, when we rely on grant funding to provide a service, we're relying on that money coming in and the money doesn't come in. Are we getting ahead of the game so we've got some priority with the services that we're providing that is reliant on grant funding as to which tap we're going to turn off and which tap we're going to keep running if there's no grant funding available? So is there a batting order of services that we do need to keep going and services that we could not have if we don't get that funding through?
I believe that they're working on that right now. It was my impression that the finance team are working with them quite closely to see what it means if funding is not approved. I don't know if they've specifically identified them, but I know they're working on it. Thank you.
Through the chair, can I just add to that, councillor? I mean, I'll be careful with my words around this, but cost shifting from different levels of governments is something that has happened in the sector for a very long time. So certainly where there is grant funding provided for programs, it's not unusual for sometimes those grant fundings to have a set tenure and might be introduced for a set period of time, and then the funding stops. At that point in time, to your point, you're absolutely right. We then need to consider whether council continues to provide that service, reduce that service, or do something different in terms of how it might fund those services. So there's no silver bullet to that equation in my experience in local government. It's going to be a constant thing. Our best chance is that when sometimes those opportunities are identified early as a sector, that we advocate very strongly for those services where there is that community benefit. But it's one that is perennial, it's one that continues on, and I'm not sure it's one that we can completely eliminate. I'll then try and get in front of it and advocate wherever we can.
Can I just ask a question from left field here? When I read these reports and we went through this agenda, it seems to me that the same old risks just keep coming up, packaged in different ways. I wonder whether this is the most efficient way of doing things. I you know, I presume that all these things are there because there's some sort of legislative obligation. But gee, it's sclerotic, isn't it?
Through the chair, we have identified that as well. And what our thought process is that now we've got the hang of what's in there. In future, we're only going to report on things that have changed. So that might reduce the content of this report down quite considerably.
You could, but I wonder if there's some scope for amalgamating these reports, and we say, okay, well, we've got this list of risks, and this will satisfy the requirements of A, B, C, and D. And so you only have to write it once, and we only have to read it once. Is there any scope potential for something like that?
Yeah, there certainly is. Yeah,
isn't it?
It's definitely on our list to look at this report and how it's presented. So we'll take that feedback on board.
Yeah, thank you. So I guess the question is it possible for one report to satisfy multiple? Yeah, just to rephrase it, is it possible for one report to satisfy multiple purposes? Particularly if we have a paragraph at the start that says that this report is prepared to satisfy the requirements of A, B, and C.
I don't know the answer to that. You know, we can investigate it.
Yeah.
Through the chair, I suppose it depends on the level of information that's, you know, the committee would like to see with regards to these higher end risks. Obviously, you've got corporate and strategic, and they're updated and reviewed every 6 months. So it's whether we're tracking the nature of just changes. The risks are going to exist. There's controls in place. It's providing those updates to the committee.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and maybe I can express it in a slightly different way. Is that just because we package up the risks in different sorts of colour graphs and everything and do it 3 or 4 times doesn't make us more or less aware of the risk, in my judgment. And I think if I can rephrase your point, is that in thinking about opportunities for rationalisation, if other members of the committee are inclined to agree with me, perhaps we could just say, well, we're open to any thoughts that you might have on, well, it's not really a problem, it's an opportunity. I'm not thinking so much of us, I'm thinking more of management resources here. I mean, here we are sitting talking about, you know, the difficulty of running the council in the black and so on. I mean, it just concerns me that people are spending a lot of time, you know, working in different ways of presenting what are essentially the same risks, you know, in different contexts.
Sorry. I was further to that. It's from my perspective, it's more about the high and extreme and maybe outside your tolerance or something like that, where we can actually have an effect. So there's a lot of reporting here that's great. It's really interesting. I'm not sure that we're going to add any value. However, I would have thought elected members would want us to be looking at high and extreme, particularly if your treatments are not, your controls are not, like if it's sitting outside of where your appetite is. That's a much better use of our time to try and hone that. Less interested in low and medium, generally speaking, but other members may have a different view, of course.
Well, I'm a numbers person, so whether you have these subjective judgments about what's high, medium, and rare, struggles to get my attention, but I accept that everyone's like that. Sorry.
Through the chair, just for confirmation, when you say the high and extreme risks, you mean residual risks or inherent?
Residual, I think, is what I'm saying. As in, yes, because then it's, and I'm assuming then it's sitting outside your tolerance. But yeah, something that is high or extreme that you've managed to mitigate, no, I'm not as concerned about, but I had to think about that for a bit. Yes.
Yeah, I think it's an important distinction.
We're happy to take that feedback on board. We have seen with previous audit and risk committees that there has been that desire to dive deeply into the risks that exist in council, but we're always open to consolidating reports, especially if we can do it in a more efficient manner.
Thank you. At the end of the day, maybe it's a good idea to keep an eye on the means versus, I'm trying to put this as a question, maybe it's a good idea to keep an eye on the means versus the ends here. It would seem to me that the ends are for us to be satisfied that you've identified the risks that are really important, that the system, the arrangements are in place to either mitigate those risks or respond to them should they eventuate, things to do with outcomes rather than endless tables with different colours.
And I suppose just to close that out, like if you had an appetite for something being low and you just could not address it and it was staying at medium, then maybe, we should be in the loop. So it's the high and extremes, or when things are sitting outside your appetite that we're not, that is not being abated. So I think that's perhaps, but yeah, mostly high and extreme.
Perhaps you'd be good enough to just take those comments on board in that review. That would be great. Thank you. Okay, so the proposition before us is that we receive and note the risk report, and that the risks identified will be monitored and reported as per our work plan. Would someone like to move that? Yeah, thank you, Paul. Someone second. Thanks, Andrew. All those in favour? All right. So thank you. So that brings us to the risk management framework review. June 33. Is there? Did you want to say something?
Yeah, thank you very much. Through the chair. We every 2 years we conduct a review of our risk management framework. This time around, we decided to make some updates. Basically, we wanted it to be easier to read and understand. We wanted it to align better with our actual practical delivery of risk management at council, and we wanted it to align with the risk management standards. So we've made some small adjustments in terms of the content and the way it's written, and we've also added in a section to show that we use the 3 tiers of risk management. I'd like some feedback if you have any, and yeah, thanks.
Comments? Sorry, questions?
Yeah, I'm prepared to start with some feedback. I actually thought it was exceptionally well put together, covered off on a lot of areas. I did think whether some of your particularly your schedules and what's catastrophic and what's medium risk for yourself as to whether it was a bit too conservative. While you wouldn't want to say it too badly, a $3 million loss for the council is recoverable. It's embarrassing. It needs to be explained, but it's not necessarily catastrophic. Certainly, it didn't go under the radar. I'm just trying to find where my other comments were. A lot of it's presented and set out that I think it gives a good framework. It probably gets back to the previous comments made about what our interaction should be with the risk besides providing assurance. There was a table in there that said if something's outside of appetite, the elevation level, whereas it rested with the CEO. And I was wondering whether, obviously it's outside of tolerance, it should actually rest with council, and obviously what our role should be in some of that.
I agree with all Andrew's comments. I actually really like it, and I find it quite. In fact, I'm probably going to borrow it for some other things, if that's okay. But I agree. Just to it still needs to be sort of socialised, I guess. Yeah.
Through the chair, just an update, I guess, for the committee is that our risk appetite statement will be reviewed after the community plan has landed, because obviously council's willingness to take risks will tie into what our priorities are that the community have expressed that we want. So that will be a further piece that will take place next year, and that will be a workshop with elected members to make those decisions, and then a report to ARC and to council.
If I can just ask about next year, or is it central, or is it just kind of playing?
At this stage, it's programmed for the March-April period.
It's perhaps not directly related, but I assume you have delegations of authority. Yeah, and do those delegations cohere with the risks? In other words, if a risk is particularly grave, or it has particularly high potential, presumably, well, it's sort of captured in the 3 lines of defence, isn't it? And let me make the question easier. Do the 3 lines of defence, are they consistent with the delegations?
Yes, very much so.
Okay. Yeah.
The financial delegations are very the sign off on a financial risk is in line with financial delegation.
But do we have delegations that apply to things in addition to finance, such as signing a contract, for instance?
Yes, that's based on the financial value of the contract. Yeah.
Okay, you captured it that way. Yeah.
Through the chair, we do have a range of delegations that are specific to each piece of legislation. So the delegations are under the power in each item in the legislation. So it's a bit separate.
So okay, so the Harbours and Navigation Act, to take an example, presumably for somebody to order that is, some boat that's docked down there to be sunk.
Yeah.
You need a delegation from a competent man or something like that.
So through the chair, council reviews the delegations, which was completed within the 12 months after an election of the elected members. And through that, then council delegates the CEO, and then sub-delegations can occur from the CEO to staff, but it's specific to each item in the legislation.
Yeah, but your point is that sometimes it doesn't fall to the administration to make those decisions, because sometimes it's prescribed by legislation.
Yeah, through the chair.
Through the chair, yes, there are some things in legislation that the CEO can't do. It has to go to the chamber, the council.
Because there's some other things that we, as I say, your hands are tied, like I don't know, waste disposing of asbestos. That you have to have. You can't just say, well, we'll delegate that to David today because he doesn't have much to do.
Through the chair, there do have to be delegatable powers that the legal advice confirms exactly what powers can be delegated, and if council doesn't have the power, then nothing can happen with that.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
That power.
Yeah. I get it. Thank you. I'm sure David's got plenty to do. Is there any other further discussion? No? Well, can I just, in putting it to be resolved, can I just echo Andrew's comments? It's an impressive document, and it's not just because it's got lots in it, but it's well set out, logical, easy to read. Yeah, so well done. All right, would somebody like to move Andrew?
Give me the pleasure to move that one.
Okay, no second, put to go. All, thank you. All those in favour? Yep, thank you. So that now brings us to our terms of reference. Thank you. Which that was some interest. So page terms of reference to.
Through the chair, do you want me to introduce this one at all?
Well, yeah, please. I think it's fair to say I've got some points, but I'm sure others do too.
So through the chair, most of the changes to the terms of reference are relatively minor, just checks the legislative reform that came into place in the Local Government Act. Most of the provisions were updated. This is really minor edits just to make sure that we're compliant with all aspects in the Local Government Act. There have been changes which have come into effect in the end of the month, end of November, with regards to Section 125A of the Local Government Act relating to a primarily responsible person for the internal audit function. This provision relates effectively from when we appoint a new person to be primarily responsible to check qualifications and also to make sure that, that person has the ability. However, because we already have someone responsible, our director corporate for the primarily responsible, we're just stating that for the sake of the legislation as to who we currently have in place.
Thank you. Is there any discussion?
No, I'm happy to endorse. I think the legislation said you need to consult the audit committee, so just making sure that that recommendation does cover that off, which I'm sure was in tempo, but.
Can I raise a point? If we look at functions, when it comes to our role in financial management, I just draw to the committee's attention that it's very circumscribed. Our role is to monitor, propose and provide, second dot point, page 304. Propose and provide information relevant to a review of the council's strategic management plans and annual business plan. So, on a literal reading, that would exclude providing any advice. All we can do is provide information, and all we can do is provide it in response to those two documents. So even some of the other functions allow us to comment, but when it comes to finance, all we can do is provide information.
Through the chair, a little bit further down in the functions, there's also a paragraph that says that the role of the committee is to review and evaluate the effectiveness of policies, systems, procedures established and maintained for identification, assessment, monitoring, management review, and review of strategic, financial and operational risks on a regular basis. So that is quite a broad set of intent where the ARC can have that input.
I saw that, but once again, it seems to me to be quite circumscribed. Is that the effectiveness of policy, systems and procedures, so that's got nothing to do with performance, and the identification, assessment, monitoring, management and review of risks. So, for instance, for us to have a view on 7 deficits in a row would have to be placed in the context of risk, would it not? So, my thinking is that the committee's title is audit and risk, not audit risk.
The other comment is that provision is quite a way down that list, and I'm not suggesting that's the order of precedence, but one tends to refer to the earlier items, and when it's described and actually deals with the various issue at clause 2 or dot point 2, the fact that it limits it there makes it difficult to argue that it is expanded below. And this one is used in generous. There you go, something for minutes.
Sorry?
There's a legal principle that's based on, which is wisdom generous, EJUSDMGENES, which is basically saying that that argument, whilst it's an argument, it's not a particularly strong argument.
Through the chair, so we have based these terms of reference on what is in the Local Government Act, but if members want to review the terms of reference further, then I guess it's open to them to do that.
Well, I guess the question though is, understanding that point, is what degree of latitude do you think there is in the Act? I mean, if the Act actually specifies this and nothing else, then it may be that there's nothing we can do.
So through the chair, the second dot point that you referred to, the propose and provide information relevant to and review of council strategic management plans and annual business plan, that is specifically stated that point in the Act, that is a function of the Council Audit and Risk Committee.
Yes, and that accords with my experience of parliamentary draftsman, someone who doesn't actually ever have to do any of these things, writes this stuff. But that doesn't really, I take that point, but it doesn't really go to my point. Unless the Act says that all audit committees of all councils are obliged to have the following terms of reference. I don't know, I don't say that.
Through the chair, the Act is such that we must include these items in the terms of reference. However, there's also an item on page 305 at the top that says that the committee can perform any other function determined by the council or prescribed by the regulations.
Yeah, so an easy remedy there, I saw that, would be to simply take that from 305 and drop it into the terms of reference, wouldn't it?
Through the chair, that point is in the terms of reference.
Sorry. 300. Oh, I'm sorry, yeah. 305. So I'm not, help me out here. Where?
The last dot point above 0.5 reporting.
Perform any other function determined by the council. Yeah, that doesn't quite, no, council could determine that it wants to get views on financial matters from us, and maybe we should bring that to a vote.
And I'm saying that specifies what an audit committee has to do, but it doesn't say, and you can't do anything else.
Right. Well, so there's two ways of handling this. If we do want to have, if we do think it's wise for the council to have a broader remit in this area, then it's contemplated by these terms of reference, is we can rely on that last dot point and go back to council, yeah, and ask it whether it wants us to do this. I don't want to do something, the council doesn't want us to do, and I certainly don't want to get in the position of assuming it away, yeah. So I think the proposition we're putting is that we avail ourselves of that last point. I haven't read it the way you did, yeah. So that in considering these terms of reference, council's attention is drawn to the last one, and that we will be looking for some guidance. So any discussion of that?
And can I suggest a change that one of the members ask for a change to the recommendation to add another point in that considering the provisions of the terms of reference, i.e. perform any other function determined by the council or prescribed by regulations, that council consider any additional functions and advisory roles that they would like ARC to perform. Is that something that would resonate with members?
I guess what I'm driving at is something, reasonably specific around money. I take the form of words, and it's a good form of words, but I just feel the need, maybe they could get a little bit more permission, and to say, I'm not quite sure what to say. It's performing out a function determined by the council, and so what I'm proposing is that the council determines that one of those functions is to provide advice on finances and what arises.
Because Andrew's moved it. I'm pretty sure he moved it. You would have to just ask Andrew if he wants to add something to that motion.
Yeah, okay, so the spotlight's on you, Andrew. You're the one who's moved it, so you would have to move that we add some words.
I'm happy to move the additional words if you can come up with the words. I'll prepare my resolution.
I'm not perhaps recommending to a second dot point, expanding that to a more holistic approach regards to financial review. Effectively, you can do this in terms of reference and recommend an additional element to that dot point or additional one.
So we go something like this, Paul, recommend to council, blah, blah, everything that's there right now, and the council, no, it's pretty easy to make it 3, wasn't it? Yeah. Recommend to
The
council.
second dot point in the terms of reference, I didn't need the second. Sorry, yes, yeah.
So, you want me to have a go? Yeah. Recommend to council. That the term relating to performing any other function determined by the council.
If I could just interrupt, please.
Yep.
Where it says propose, comment, and provide information, you could just make that information and advice relevant to. So just insert 2 words into that second dot point of functions. I think that would actually cover off on largely all this.
If council doesn't agree, if council doesn't agree, what we're looking for here is some permission to provide financial advice.
I didn't say financial advice here, sorry.
Yeah.
So I thought it actually said financial, it doesn't. Yeah. Okay.
Includes matters of financials.
Yeah.
Yes, you're right, because it's our role to provide advice to council, it's up to them whether they accept the advice or not for us to insist on it.
So through you, Chair, perhaps that third dot point is that ARC recommend to council that the term relating to performing any other function determined by the council includes any matters of financial significance. Obviously, there's a definitional thing there, but the intent is really to say that you've got to focus on matters relating to financial significance.
Would it be, yeah, I think that's right, but would it be includes advice on matters of financial significance?
Yeah.
Yep. Includes advice on, you might not need any there, just on matters of financial. Yeah.
Yeah, matters of financial.
How's everyone with that? Yep. Okay, Andrew, do you want to, you've moved.
I'm happy to include that in my interim motion.
Thank you. Would someone like to second it?
Happy to second it.
Thank you. All those in favour? Very good. Thank you. That brings us to 7.11 corporate governance first quarter. Nicole?
Through the chair, I'm happy for this to be taken as read unless there's any specific queries.
Any discussion? No? Someone like to move that we receive and note the report? Andrew, thank you.
Happy to.
Councillor Pritchard, thank you. All those in favour? Yep, okay, thank you. That brings us to 7.12, the Audit and Risk Committee work plan or UG for this year. I guess actually, when that makes me think when we think about the term of reference goes to council, that of course it's now meant to be more consistent with this work plan, as I read it. Yeah. So it's just a bit of tidying up, really. Anyway, Nicole.
Through the chairs, we can change the dates further to the earlier discussion of the committee.
Thank you. I think that would be a good idea. Any discussion?
Yeah, I think it was just that on page 318, the top of that, where there was that the budget reviews for each quarter we presented to the committee following the relevant council meeting, but this will still allow opportunity for the committee to provide feedback on each budget review to the finance team. That was the bit, that was the earlier discussion where I just thought that should be flipped around. You know, I think that's
okay. So
I think that's outside of where if you look at, if you just read what the purpose of the ARC is, it's not necessarily provide feedback on each budget review to the finance team. It's actually there to provide some advice to an assurance and that to the council, I think. So but that just goes back to that earlier discussion.
Yeah.
About the meeting schedule. So if the meeting schedules are flipped around to ensure that the ARC meeting is before the council meetings, particularly when there's finance reports.
Yep.
Yeah.
So that affects the work plan. And so too, perhaps the work plan could include something about consideration of the procedures for the meetings. Because I don't know where else we capture that. You know, we've had this injection from Paul and from Councillor Yeomans about well, first of all, recordings, and secondly, the formality of the meetings. If we're going to put something, a recommendation to council, we need to get our minds around that pretty quickly, don't we?
Yeah, I see advice from governance on that, and there was a couple of emails bouncing around on that. So
yeah, that's right.
I'm not too sure if the formalisation of the meetings is a consequence of the meetings being recorded because they're in this room. And I know there were some emails back and forth and talking to the independent members that interpretation of whether they need to be formalised, like you would as a council meeting, seems to be interpreted differently, perhaps with other councils. And there's been a lot of examples this afternoon on where that formal process probably dilutes the effectiveness of the committee. And again, I'll just refer back to the experts in the room, the independent members who have had a lot of experience in this as to which is the better way to go. And I think if we adopted, Councillor Pritchard had gone through the formal process of council meetings, and I get that. I think if we adopted that process and we stuck to that, we wouldn't be getting anywhere near the level of discussion that we're having here at the moment. If we're going by, you got to have questions and you're going to have one crack at the debate. I think, you know, we're sort of more contributing to the discussion, and I think we get pretty good outcomes out of that. So just open to advice and how we could perhaps remediate that.
This is the experience of others, which is quite in comparison to other councils, and it can be a bit challenging, and obviously through the chair, this concept that if you say something, you've got to, you know, it's quite tightly locking down something. It obviously is what is happening in the chamber, but it's not common in my experience in that precise way in other council committees. I'm on 5, I've been on 2 others, so that's 7. Just worth having a think about. It does feel a bit clunky at times. It's a technical term.
Yeah.
So through the chair, what I'm sensing from the committee is your desire to have more in-depth debate and conversations in a more fluid environment. So we'll get the team to have a look at what the legislative arrangements around that, and if there's ability for us to make it more accommodating in enabling those deeper conversations, then that's what I'm hearing the app would like.
John Salisbury a few years ago was a bit than it is now, and in a similar kind of way that we are established here, and it was a bigger room, which made it even harder. We changed rooms, and it just became more effective. There was more discussions that were robust, meaningful, helpful, and I'm not, you know, the recording ideas, I think that just dictates the room, doesn't it? I'm not, and certainly moved on from that. It's more about how we're engaging. This is not a political process. It's not intended to be, and the formality does tend to distract somewhat. And yeah, it's probably the most what I've encountered today. Which is fine, but yeah, I just need to say that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Look, there is a really easy, simple solution around this. This meeting is recorded. It is a regulatory committee, and I'm not sure how other councils are reading it, but because it is a regulatory committee doing an act that is part of the legislation, it is required to have the level of formal meeting procedures. But the way around that is that when we start each item, all we do is suspend the formal meeting procedures. So then the committee can talk, it can provide opinion, ask questions, do whatever it likes, form a resolution, then we just move back into the formal meeting procedures, move the motions and move on to the next item. So there's definitely a mechanism about it. And the fact that the meeting is recorded, there's a level of scrutiny out there that it is being watched, and we are required to stick to those procedures.
So we just asked with the suspension, is that something that each time? Because it will say that it's not something I'm experiencing.
It will be something a little bit annoying that you should do for each item, but it could be something that we write into our minutes template so that the chair just indicates that we're moving into informal meeting procedures. Yeah. And it's very quite easy.
Yeah. Can I just suggest that, given that there's 68 councils, I think, in South Australia, and that others have got some of those experiences, that we just have a look at it, that we see if there is that opportunity, because I think I'm hearing that it doesn't happen for quite a number of the other committees. So I'm wondering how they go about doing their meetings and seeing if there is that option. I appreciate what you've shared with committee, but I think we should have a look at it, because I can only speak about other jurisdictions, and in other states, there is a lot of benefit in having meaningful discussions at ARC and in-depth conversations on these items for the administration. So I think we should just have another look at that and see if it's possible.
I wonder whether, just to capture properly then, supporting that, can I suggest that whoever puts the moves the motion, and adds and or we either do a number 2 or something and just say, and ask that meeting procedures be added to the work program.
I'm happy to so move.
Thanks. So that means you're talking about formality. That means that you've got to move the whole thing, right? Yep.
I guess so, yeah.
Yep.
I'm also adapting to the same world order as well.
Thank you, Paul. Is it seconded? I'm happy to. Thanks, Jim. All those in favour? Okay, so now we come to actions arising from minutes. No. No. Okay. Nicole, is there anything?
Happy for the report to be taken as read.
Yeah. Is there any discussion?
I'm going to say I like the way it's set out and it's really clear and easy to understand. Thank you.
Yeah. If not, we just move that we note the status of actions arising. Yeah. Someone want to move that? I move that, Councillor Pritchard. Do I have a seconder? Second, Councillor Ammons, thank you. All those in favour? Yep. That brings us to questions on notice. I assume there aren't any. Petitions, mercifully there's no petitions. Urgent business? No. Confidential items? Zip. In that case, I'm happy to declare the meeting closed and thank you for your contributions, administration and committee members.